discussion of possible zoning changes under discussion prior to Sustainable Northampton. A, site plan approval clarity and zoning technical performance standards.
Brandy?
So let me just run through this. These things all merge together.
Randy?
Brandy, I just want to, this is being video recorded, just so you know. Okay?
How about the audio?
Yeah, it's both. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just letting you know.
Thank you. Well, now, as I understand it, you can videotape anything, but if there's an audio tape, you have to tell us. That's what really
Yep.
I should have done that at the beginning.
So you all had a good discussion when you were at the planning board, with the city council 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whenever you met, about sort of the Sustainable Northampton rezoning committee. And one aspect of the discussion which George harped in on, and some of you to a lesser extent talked about, is that what's the role of your routine review of zoning changes, which you've always done, as opposed to specifically implementing Sustainable Northampton, which the Sustainable, with this committee will get involved in. The committee's yet to be defined exactly what it is. And one of the things that George was clear on is that we expect the process still keeps going. The non-big picture Sustainable Northampton keeps going. But one of the challenges that I have in trying to think how do we implement that is, I don't know exactly where that line is. And so I want to talk about a series of zoning changes that make sense. I don't want you to think that I'm making a decision which category you should put in. So this is so the discussion kind of hoping is about two things. One is about the substance of the specific zoning changes, and the other is the process. Should they be the old process, or should they be the separate process? And so I just have a series of things to go through, and hopefully it helps illustrate those things. And what you see in the agenda is my first attempt, and it's really just a first attempt. It's not to be prejudicial in any way, to say this is item 4. I think item 4 potentially things that you could do without the Sustainable Northampton Committee, and item 5 are clearly things that need the committee. But you may draw the line differently. I'm really not trying to push that. I just want you to think about what those things are. So as a preface, I want to talk about sort of what's the process that probably makes sense for any zoning change, Sustainable Northampton or otherwise. We typically do most of these things for all but housekeeping changes, but it might be worth finalizing, or formalizing. So the first is what we've done for controversial issues, but not for every issue, is we typically do an open house in Office of Planning Development. We invite people in instead of the staff there for 3 or 4 hours, and people can come in and chat with us. That happened most recently for the Water Supply Protection 2 zoning changes, which were very controversial and a lot of property owners involved. So we sent a notice out, and notice said specifically, again, it's easier when it's a notice to all the property owners, and said, look, you're welcome to come to a public hearing. This isn't to exclude that, but often people just have questions. If you want to come in to talk to staff, we'll be available from 4 to 8 on a Wednesday afternoon type thing. And so that's the first thing. I think it's worth, for all the changes I'm going through, maybe making that a more formal process. We sort of do it on, when staff thinks it's a controversial issue, we do it. We don't do it on other things. Maybe it's worth.
Get announced in the press?
We get announced usually by the legal ad we put in the paper and into the press, yeah. So that's the first one. The second one, again, this is an area we've probably been inconsistent about. Sometimes for particularly controversial things, again, we do this for water supply protection too, you hold a public forum before you formally introduce it to City Council. Sometimes for smaller things, the zoning graphics that you did last month, you send it to City Council and then it comes back. I think it's worth doing sort of the public forum piece. My guess is for things like,
Well, the only thing about that, because there's been a discussion lately about whether or not the city council can hold forums on the landfill before it's actually been submitted.
So there's 2 hats that City Council wears that you all wear. A legislative hat and quasi-judicial. When you issue a permit for quasi-judicial, you can't hold a hearing ahead of time, all that stuff, and that's why the City Council is dealing with this for you. But a legislative hat that can do that all they want. Same thing, when you're doing either a master plan change or a zoning change, you're a legislative body. You can run into people in the grocery store and chat with them.
For these pre-submittal meetings, if a member of the board isn't there, it doesn't preclude them from voting on it later.
These are about zoning changes.
I know.
So for zoning changes, yes, exactly right.
So there's nothing like we all have to be there, or quorum has to be there. There's
Correct.
no responsibility on us.
Correct. I mean, a complete paper record, you still have the issues of, if there's a quorum, it has to be an advertised meeting. All the normal open record laws apply, but all that quasi-judicial stuff that we beat you guys up on over permits doesn't
So we
apply
could,
for.
we can discuss it without the open meeting law issues, that kind of thing.
No, open meeting law still applies.
Oh, so,
But in this form.
Not the public hearing, the laws on public hearings are much stricter. That's where we run into,
well, that's, I mean, I'm talking about the public forum,
So it's a public, it's still a public meeting, it'll still be advertised, it'll
Right.
still be here.
but you're saying if I run into somebody outside of that meeting,
That's fine.
I could have a discussion with them on that.
That's right.
Or two members of the planning board can discuss the
Right.
issue.
You could, this public forum would still have to be advertised, would
Right.
still, but it wouldn't, it's not like you would then be barred for voting when it formally comes for a public hearing.
So, just,
Yeah.
you gave us one example, and I'm not sure I remember that night, but that was for the watershed protection district down below the landfill on that side of town. Is there another example where we've done this?
Yes, but not recently.
Did we-
It tends to be for map changes, because map changes, we're required by ordinance to notify people.
We didn't do it with the Meadows plan. We did something, but that wasn't a
It is
zoning
separate set
change.
of form. Meadows plan did, but it was a different form. The plan was much more implementation focused than most. So the plan itself included draft zoning.
Right.
So there were lots of public forums about that, so
Right.
people could see it. So
Right. Okay.
Meadows plan did that. And that's been the format for the downtown plan, the Florence plan, both include draft zoning.
Yep.
And so for those big ones, you did it, it was a slightly different format, but it was part of doing the plan, we actually included draft zoning.
So it wouldn't have been appropriate for the Pulaski Park Hotel or the Smith College building because those were permits.
Pulaski Park was too heavy. As a permit, it wouldn't have been. As an RFP process, it could have been.
It could have
That
been,
was a choice
and
decision.
maybe should have been, especially when we did the height zoning change in the downtown.
So
Okay,
that could have been.
all right.
Right, so any planning process can be, even, so it might ultimately be a permit. That's permit. Then the next 4 steps, 5 steps, you all know, then at some point you say, fine, let's go ahead and formally submit this to city council. It gets referred out to committee, and city council committee, economic development, housing, and land use. You all hold a joint public hearing with ordinance committee, occasionally separate public hearings, but usually joint.
Wait, well, who submits it to the city council?
Typically, you're the sponsoring group, but it could be planning office as well.
This gets initiated in the OPD, and then you hold the open house. But the initiation of the zoning change.
So the formal zoning change, typically, the planning board at some point says we want to sponsor the zoning change. So most zoning changes are sponsored by the planning board, that's not required. So you've done some, we've done some small, I can't remember the graphics one, I think you guys sponsored it. And there's some very small things, like housekeeping thing, we're sponsored, we tend to have you guys sponsor, but we don't have to.
Sometimes city council.
It's not a city council, that's right. That's right. There's one recently, I think before you were on, Catherine, to raise the height of towers to allow water towers to be taller, specifically around Turkey Hill. I think that was actually sponsored by the Department of Public Works. So any city department or board can sponsor something. I would say probably 90% of zoning changes are sponsored by the planning board, but it doesn't have to be.
What does EDH all of this stand for?
I think it's the City Council, Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and Land Use. And it's made up of 4 city councilors, the mayor, and the voting members, and then the planning board has a liaison, non-voting conservation commission's liaison. Okay, so this is the formal process that's mostly spelled out by either ordinance or by state law. And then, at some point, here's where the line is, at some point there's gonna be this extra step, it's everything we talked about, plus the things that are yet to be defined, the Sustainable Northampton. And I don't know where that line is. I think clearly map changes are the clearest. I mean, if I live in a URB district and I'm suddenly becoming a URA district, very controversial, you probably have to come through this process. And I have this as a placeholder, a paradigm shift, when we talk about doing things differently. Kevin wants to talk later about form-based codes, you talked about this before. Clearly form-based codes go through that, clearly sort of different perspectives on how we're doing things go through this. If we suddenly say, we've talked in years past about merging portions of URA district with URB district. Clearly those are big, rethinking how we do it. But again, I don't know where the lines are. I know paradigm shifts will come through this process. I know housekeeping stuff won't, and I don't know where the line is between this. So,
So trying to wrap my head around this discussion. I think what you're leading us to is that in the next couple of months, as we look at this rezoning committee, they may be, depending upon the breadth of the zoning change or the map change, they may be trumping the planning board process.
Well, no, I still assume it's a collaborative process, so I'm not sure it's trumping, but it's an extra step. It's an extra step of process because we wanna make sure that many more people are involved in the process.
But I think the issue is we haven't figured out where in the previous slide that Sustainable Northampton Rezoning Committee process fits in.
Right.
And that's the,
Go back to the previous slide.
So this is things, this we should be doing for everything.
Yep.
And then there's a subset we should be doing more. And I don't quite know what that subset
I don't
is.
think
Part of
it's-
it is your work and Ken's work with the two city
Right.
councilors.
I don't think it's a question of where it fits into the process, it's what things go through that process.
Right, you're right.
And what go through our own process. So, if it's adding more diagrams to zoning to clarify what's already there, then you can make the argument that doesn't have to go through the Sustainability Northampton Rezoning Committee, you know, maybe but you're right, what things are part of the sustainability and what are
Right.
just typical.
So I have 6 examples of things that frankly I hope you guys think about and move forward on, but I also am doing it partially, you know, this is a framework, but it's a framework that's hard to think about without examples. So I want to go through my examples both in terms of are you actually interested in moving forward to them, but also maybe each one come back to these slides and say, okay, which category, you know, do you want to move forward? Let's say at the end of the day, you all said you love all 6 things you want to move forward. I'm not saying you do that, but let's say you loved all 6. The question would then be, which class do you want to put them to? And so, and as you act in those 6, it may be helpful to think about, okay, did that start helping us figure out where that line is?
but exactly what Keith was saying, don't we know what stuff comes from and has to go through sustainability and which is, I mean,
No.
That's the,
Because everything you're working on, we threw in sustainability plans in the appendix to think about. Some are major paradigm shifting things that clearly have to go through them.
right,
Some are really tiny things and a lot are in between.
so there is still some discretion over what in that appendix or the whole plan has to go through
Yeah.
the sustainability committee, which can come directly from us.
Okay, let's see. Okay.
Yeah, let's see this.
Okay, so, you know, just to say what you said, these are things we should think about. So, first one, this is what I passed out to you guys only 6 weeks ago. This partially is a reaction to thinking about, you know, almost being sued for Beaver Brook, but it's also partially this comes up at other times. In years past, every single major project for housing was a subdivision. And the subdivision book is thick and it has lots of technical standards. And we tend not to get involved. You know, DPW says you have to use ductile iron pipe, and we believe DPW and you guys adopt it. And you don't spend hours in the planning board meeting saying should the pipe be ductile iron. What we're seeing is more and more projects coming as condos. And they're not subject to this. And then they come before you and they say, oh, I don't need ductile iron, you know, SDR35 plastic pipe is just fine. And DPW says, look, we're willing to give you engineering advice, but we don't really care because it's not our system. And so you can spend lots of hours, this is what happened with Beaver Brook, saying, well, is Schedule 35 just as good, or SDR35 pipe just as good as ductile iron? You know, certainly my issue is the more a project looks and feels like a subdivision, more property owners are going to assume we're protecting their interest. And SDR35 pipe is a great example. It's a wonderful pipe. For the next 30 years, you're not going to have any problem. But ductile iron lasts 100 years, and SDR35 lasts 50, whatever the number is. You know, and so I probably need to live to see the consequences of SDR35, but there's a reason DPW likes ductile iron. I'm not an engineer. I can't tell you, you know, how much better ductile iron is than SDR35, but I know it's better.
We're essentially setting standards for all new roads in the city, whether private or public.
Right. So this is saying, look, whether a project has sidewalks or not, whether it has water or not, all those things, planning board has to discuss. That's part of site plan approval. But those, I'm not an engineer, so if anyone's an engineer, don't be too offended. Those born engineering standards, okay, if a project's gonna have water, I don't wanna have hours saying is it ductile iron or SDR35. So my suggestion is, Those technical standards are generally here. This language, this would be part of the site plan approval standards. This only comes in for site plan project, and it would clearly say generally. So if someone comes in and says to you,
Unclear.
and says to you, look, I want to use STR 35, you have every right to approve it. And we write DPW a letter, and we say, what do you think? And they tell us what they think. But this sort of default, when an applicant comes to talk to Carolyn or I, we'd say, Carolyn or me, we'd say, we expect you to meet those construction standards. If there's some reason not to, that's fine. So it's really to put people on notice is the idea.
Can we put teeth in this?
This gives you the ability clearly in site plan, every single time say that's what we expect. So if you find something different, I think it's very strong.
So do they have to apply for a waiver if they wanna put in, cheese and stuff?
Well, you have to do a specific finding that says different standards more appropriate.
So anyways, is the discussion about this specifically, or is it globally to say, is this the type of thing as?
Well, it's both again. I mean, I'd like to move forward on this. The question is which of those.
No, but I'm saying for our discussion right now, are we getting bogged down in the details that would come at a?
I'm hoping you do both, but you tell me what you wanna do first.
But wait, can you clarify for me once more? So, this, knowing this, maybe there's some people on the planning board who really could evaluate the quality of the pipes. I certainly couldn't, I would have no clue. So, is that really a function of the planning board to make decisions at a level at which we have no expertise? I mean, is it appropriate?
I think it is. I think that's what you're charged. Because DPW is primarily charged with protecting city infrastructure. So when I can pick on Maryland, when Maryland buys a house in a condo, she doesn't necessarily say, can I see your engineering plans, and can I look to see if you use ductile iron in my pipe? And so to some extent, you guys serve a lot of purposes, but to some extent it's about fire protection.
But you don't think that that's something that we could defer to the staff on?
I think what staff is saying is we need a standard for what you refer to us on.
They can't tell somebody to do it unless we codify it.
Okay.
And those things aren't covered under state building codes.
Most of them are not, right? Within buildings, we try not to put anything in our regulations because we're right.
Just to give it slightly more teeth, I would just take out the word generally, because the last clause gives us
Okay.
the ability, so just say the construction standards for yada,
Excellent.
yada, yada.
Capital T.
Because the real question is this something that we think we should move forward with now or in the next couple of weeks, or something that we should defer to the new committee?
I see this as in the category of minor, and.
Well, I think it's something we ought to do right away.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's something to bring to the bigger group or
What?
the other group.
So I agree with you, and I think this is something that a group with broader issues would have a hard time with. But know that, you could be talking about a big difference between SDR 35 pipe and ductile iron.
So I'm a developer, I want a chance to weigh in on this.
And you will,
When?
because we'll have our normal, we're discussing where we go with that first thing, where we go through the normal process, whether we do a public forum or not.
And we probably formalize these two first steps, but sometimes and not always.
And the only question is, do we do this as we do now, or do we wait for this Sustainability Northampton Zoning Committee to?
It doesn't really look like it's a zoning
That's,
issue.
it's still gonna go through the whole public vetting process, it's not like we're voting on it tonight and that's it. Is it?
No, certainly not. You're right. I mean, this language is supposed to be final. It's what I'm looking for now is, yes, which box do you want to put it in? And if you want to put it in the box and you're moving forward, that we're then working language, we're vetted with DPW, we do all our normal, we do staff vetting too, so we do that and then come back to you all, we're doing that. But I want to know, is this in my work program? Should I be doing this?
I don't know. It might be that maybe we're not the screeners. Maybe everything goes into the box of the new zoning committee, and they say, oh, back to planning board, back to planning board, back to planning board. No, let's keep this one. That's
I really
another way of
think
looking
that-
at it.
I mean, to say that everything we do has to go for a committee that doesn't even exist, it may not exist for months, when, if
When it's
6
our
months
job.
ago we had talked about this, there wouldn't have been a discussion, that it had to go to the.
It's also our job.
So, I think, because this is not something directly related to sustainability, this is just something we wanna do anyway, I don't see why it would have to go to that other committee first. I don't think, just like the mayor was saying, every decision by the city council now does not have to go through the best practices committee, that's not why it was set up. Just like every decision we make now does not have to go through the sustainability committee.
Plus, the council could have the option, I guess, to either an ordinance or the full council saying, oh, wait a minute, this has implications for sustainability, we wanna table it and send it back to the sustainability.
There's lots of-
If they feel, so there are checks and balances along the way, and presumably that could happen if, during the hearing process, if there's enough uproar and say,
Yep.
really, this is a sustainability thing, we can table it and send it back.
Okay, so next one's a little harder, which I deliberately set up. Traffic mitigation. So background on this one, again, 4 years ago roughly, you all, working with city council, got a new ordinance which created this traffic mitigation, where you spend so much of your time in this case. And at the time we said, okay, the basic idea, I cut out a lot of stuff, but the basic idea is we want projects to pay their proportional share of, incremental changes. So, it used to be if your intersection was going from level of service D to level of service E for traffic, we made them make improvements. But if they're adding 5 cars, we didn't make them make improvements, but over the years, it added up. And so you all on council worked together to draft this, and ever since you've been doing this, and Carol and I have a spreadsheet where we track all the stuff you do to try to see if all these 50 different projects you've acted, 50 different district projects, if they're telling the story. Are you beginning to say we're charging this and beginning to charge this? And you have been, as you all know. And so going back 4 years ago, we always said, as soon as it told the story, we'd come back to council with a more clear format, because we don't know, this makes a lot of sense intuitively, but everyone feels like a backroom deal. Because the developer comes in and I say, here's the dollars we need. And they're gonna think, am I making this up? And I'm much more comfortable saying, we're open and above, here's the formula. Anyone can look at it, and we can go to public hearing, people can agree with the formula or disagree with the formula. So again, this fits in as, this is a major effect. We're collecting $20,000 a year for these traffic mitigation. Big effects, one could argue it should go before this committee. On the other hand, this is a 4-year work in progress. We're moving forward to doing this, and that's again why the line's a little hard. So I've been playing with it. This is partially what you've been doing, and partially recommending some changes to make a little more sense, or to have a message. And so again, don't worry the numbers, but you agree the details, because the first question is what Keith keeps saying is, how do you want to do this? But what we're saying, and this is partially sustainable, is we love development central business system. That's sort of the core. That's where we get the greatest amount of ridership for buses is downtown. We have 146 buses a day stop down. The greatest amount of pedestrian activity, the greatest amount of bicycle activity is downtown. And so this says, well, there shouldn't be any mitigation for projects in the central business system. And then the next one is sort of what you've been doing. You basically been charging $2,000 a peak trip and charging half of that within walking distance of downtown Florence. And what's walking distance? Well, I don't know. But so this sort of formalizes and says, well, in those business districts that are very pedestrian friendly, general business, and in the industrial districts, we've said we really want to get redevelopment. So part of this is, encouraging economic development by not charging as much. And in State Hospital and Dickinson campus, and those neighborhoods that are in close walking distance, saying it's $1,000. And again, practically what you've been doing in slightly different terms. The third one is this is now a split between the third and the fourth, which you didn't have before. The third and fourth, you've sort of been lumping together as $2,000. This is trying to break down a little bit more and saying, what are the places we're talking about? We keep saying we encourage transit-oriented development, but we don't really do that. We keep saying if you're next to a bike path or a sidewalk, that's good. Is a way to reflect that. And so, again, these are somewhat arbitrary, but if you're in 500 feet of a transit stop and 500 feet of a bike path, if you're on a sidewalk that doesn't end somewhere, it's not an orphan, but a sidewalk that goes all the way to Florence or downtown, maybe that's $2,000. And maybe everything else, the dumb stuff, is $3,000.
With a sidewalk that extends without breaking in, doesn't cross the street.
No, it doesn't, there's a continuous sidewalk from point A to point B, so from here to your house, even though you cross streets, you can get on site, you never have to walk in the street, you can walk on sidewalk the whole way.
Rockridge doesn't count because the sidewalk's 100 feet and doesn't go anywhere. But it's
But-
not, yeah.
I can imagine number 3, there's gonna be a sidewalk, I could probably walk from here to Florence, or continue through Florence and get to, large parts of
Yeah,
town.
and so I would say any development between here and Florence should never be more than $2,000 a feet. But if you're out in most of Ward 6, there's no sidewalk. So if you look at the map, again, this is why this is, I mean, on the one hand, I can say we've been working this for 4 years, this certainly should be going forward now. And then I can say, well, clearly, if you look at the map in the Sustainable Northampton Plan, everything in the last category is basically the conservation development area except for highway business. So, you know, it's, let me go through this and then
So, again, are we using this as an example of the planning board of the sustainability, or do you wanna go through some other ones? Is there more that you want
I
to?
did 2 more slides for this to show.
For the same.
Yeah, so this is practically how the map turns out. We don't have a good map of sidewalks, so it's not a complete map, but it's the best that we could do. You can see, so geographically, most of the cities is the big number, but practically in terms of where development is, most of it's not. Again, we could play with this, and we also don't have a great map of all the transit stops. It's a good first cut to see what it looks like. And then again, the other place we deal with people is, what does IT really say? What are the standards? And so this is sort of a simplified version of IT. We spend lots of time on this, and Keith would look at this. I'm not going to go through the numbers, but just know that this would be part of an effort is to spell this out. So yes, what do you think? Okay.
I think it goes through the old process.
So, one of the discussions that's happening, and all due credit to Wayne, but most of the time when we look at zoning amendments or new zoning things, they come from Wayne's office. Part of the discussion the other night with the city council is that there may be other experts out there who've done some of the zoning work and drafted a lot of zoning things, and there's a chance for them to perhaps have some input into zoning changes. When we talk about traffic and mitigation, that's one of the big components of the sustainability plan, what we're doing about, because, and in an exciting way, I think, and people have a lot of ideas about how to mitigate traffic. So I would say, even though we've been doing this on and on, kind of with developers and asking for the $2,000 or whatever, I think now that we're gonna codify it more and do examples and do different creative things like that sidewalk piece, I would say that it would go, that the sustainability concept, the group would get a little pass at this one also.
I think this is different than what you were just talking about. This is basically just giving a formula to what we're already doing, what's already in the zoning. I think what you're talking about is like TDM type stuff, ideas for TDM, where this is basically assigning a number for the number of peak hour trips or number of trips.
Yeah, but this is also very fiscal minded. And there may be other mitigation factors that aren't fiscal minded that sound like they're TDM, but still might come into the play. If somebody is gonna say, I'll give you $2,000 per unit, or I will convince PBTA to come up here, then we wanna see PBTA come up there.
But then that would, yeah, right?
And we don't have that option here.
No, you do. Just to be clear, so where this fits in site plan approval is the planning board may accept in lieu of payments if someone doesn't want to do the improvements. So just like, you know, for when new Hondas, old Hondas get redeveloped, they were going to do signal improvements that are right there. You weren't getting any cash. So you'd still have that same mix. This would always be a voluntary payment, and so someone could certainly make improvements. And this would also be part of site plan approval. So it's the board that's weighing this. It's not a fixed piece. It's again, the idea is that's the transparency. It's the idea of replacing staff that we're telling people what the numbers are. It comes before you and you have the ability to do these other things.
Right.
Basically telling the applicant what our upper limit is, you know,
Yep.
if they give us what this table says, then we'll approve it, whereas, you know, if they wanna do less, then they have to convince us that.
Is it possible to codify it in this way, but also run it by the new, rezoning, committee blankets, so that they take a look at it and approve it?
Yeah, I mean, either before it passes or certainly when you
Start
revisit it.
using it and see how this works,
But can we do, can it be both. You gotta either go through the old process or the new process. I mean,
For-
So-
It's like any zoning, you know, we update it, it doesn't mean it can't be updated again.
I sort of agree with George, though, I think there's a lot of stuff here that could have sustainability implications that we're not really even addressing. But this might be a good starting point, but then how about getting it, running through that other lens?
Well, I guess the reason, I can see it being part of a bigger thing, because part of what makes me uncomfortable is we've had it a couple times when the applicant clearly didn't know that we were gonna ask for this payment. And, I remember when somebody was doing a common driveway with 3 houses, and we said, oh, we're expecting $12,000, and he was like, really? And it was kind of an oddly uncomfortable moment for all of us. And I would feel more comfortable because we're gonna be doing this, again, we have things coming before us that are gonna happen long before this committee even gets set up, and that who knows how long their process is. So I would feel comfortable doing this in the old process so we can start on it. But I think Sustainable Northampton's got so many parts of it that address traffic and these kind of issues that we're probably gonna come back to this again through the sustainability plan, but I've always felt it's been a hole in what we're doing now that I'd like to kind of formalize, so that we don't have these kind of odd pauses in the middle of a public meeting where the applicant finally, oh, you want money?
Oh, that's what you were talking about?
Oh, that's what that was all about,
That doesn't happen quite as often anymore. I think now it comes out in conversations with Wayne and Carol
But it's like,
informally.
it's a
but I know what
conversation
you
in their
mean.
office that, and then they come to us and
Sure.
we
But
can
then-
all nod and say,
Sure.
okay, sure.
But I don't think, all it's doing is putting specificity to what's already happening. It's just
That's
basically
why,
giving language to what Wayne tells them from his spreadsheet is gonna be in the zoning. I don't think it has any sustainability nor anything new that's not being done already under existing zoning. You know what I mean? It just sort of like defines what is being done. So I don't think
agree
it's
with
sort of
Steve
like,
on that.
I don't think it precludes this issue from coming up with the sustainability. I think it's just, putting numbers about something we're already doing. It's just not well defined.
Well, I don't agree. I think it's a piece of a very big discussion in the city that has to happen.
Everything is.
And if we,
Everything is.
Yeah.
I mean, you could make that point.
But this-
Yep.
I could understand if it was the original zoning language, because that was a shift change in the way we were doing business that may, I don't know if it's ever made or break a project, but may discourage development or whatever. But in fact, this is, like essentially a language change or an edit to what's already there, just to define exactly what we mean by, it's almost like adding probably a lot more than adding a diagram, but it's pretty similar to that sort of thing. But,
Yep, so maybe we should go on to another example. I think, we'll all think of this one.
But there's no right answer, that's what makes it
Yeah.
fun, frankly, there's no right answer.
We don't have to decide on it right now.
No, I mean, the more you move forward, you got,
we just wait till George, meet when George is not here.
Okay.
Or we wait for me when you
Well,
vote for
well,
them. I'm just.
so again, in the efforts of making each one a little harder for you all. Central Business District, when we built the parking garage, or actually just before we built the parking garage, in 1988, we said you have to provide parking if you're doing use downtown. And if you don't, you have to provide $16,000 for parking space you don't provide. And we've been reducing that number ever since, saying we don't want private lots in the downtown because a typical private lot has an occupancy rate of less than 50%. A typical public lot has an occupancy rate, I don't know what the number is, but it's well in excess of 75%. And so you want, not necessarily public, but we want shared lots that serve different uses at different times. And so you've been reducing the payment in lieu of fee. The obvious question I have is, why do we do anything? Why are we wasting our time? If again, we're trying to encourage development here, and the next thing, get rid of it. So again, you can look at this thread that's been going on 20 years of been reducing it, but clearly it's a sustainable thing as well. So, it fits that same category of this. From a draftsman standpoint, this one's easy. It's 30 seconds to cut cut out the section of zoning that requires parking in the central business district. But which process does this one go through?
This feels different to me, this
Okay.
feels bigger, like a some sort of a shift that implicates sustainability, and it's quite a change, I think, from what we've been doing, and like you said, we've been shifting towards it,
Yeah.
but it would be a final change.
I know, yeah, that's that's fine, it's just funny, that's my gut feeling is, getting rid of parking requirements sounds so big, it's a big change. And then I have to say, when we just went recently from 4,000 to 2,000, which we did in last year, it seemed very minor. And it sailed through council, it was an easy discussion. And so if you look at 4,000 to 2 to 0 is basically the same sketch, but you're right, we're getting rid of it in some ways, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea, I just think that it's the kind of thing that I envision the committee
Absolutely not, yeah.
vetting.
So consensus on that?
I don't know, I'm maybe getting confused. See, I thought this committee was like looking at like, totally new stuff, related to the mapping and stuff like that. I guess in one hand it could be seen as a huge sea change, but $2,000 in a development, say for example, the hotel, say they couldn't build 5 spaces, so they gave us, 10 grand or whatever. It's not something that makes or breaks a project, I don't know,
Yeah, how often does
it just seems that if we're gonna pass along little things like this to the zoning committee, nothing's ever gonna come out of it, because they're gonna be too busy dealing with all the little I'm not saying it necessarily doesn't warrant, but it just seems like, to me, it just seems like a minor change. Like if it was 20,000 to now, then that would definitely have an impact on potentially the type of projects, but that's
Would you
just.
anticipate a lot of resistance to someone like getting rid of it?
I think it's kind of people who are worried about, do you get more development downtown, and does it become more congested? So that's probably where the resistance would come from. The counter thing is, you're not seeing that many people who actually do this. Michael Sispin, when he did his project in Strong Avenue, he sold those garages for $50,000 each. So getting rid of the parking requirement wouldn't have gotten rid of his parking because it's worth it financially. And certainly a lot of people think the parking is worth it to them. But I think you saw that some people were concerned about it. When we went from 4,000 to 2,000, we heard sort of people saying, oh, they're worried about this, but no one, I don't think a single person said they were against it. A few people said, what's it going to affect? And that was deliberately why we did it in stages. We only went to 2,000 to see it recently. Every private parking lot gets developed.
But it is kind of a philosophical thing, it's a different kind of, it's not just fundamentally lowering what you're paying, it's actually,
Yep.
it's a position about parking, in the central business district,
Yep.
which is a change, so I would tend to agree with Jeff.
Yeah, Keith, I think you're right. It's hard to know where this group is taking over. We're not asking, it's almost like this is becoming a planning oversight group now, that they're gonna look at everything which before was in our purview, and that wasn't the initial intent. But it's also not just to look at, some people are rather leery of just to look at the zoning things that were projected, or the draft ones that were in the sustainability plan. And those aren't the only ones they're looking at either. So I'm not sure how to define the ones that this group is going to look at, or how do we define sustainability?
Well, I think that, if you look at it with too broad a brush, you can everything.
Right.
Into
Right.
sustainability.
And then,
That's my worry, is we're gonna add
Yep.
so much process to this,
right.
that it's gonna be hard for us to move forward on things that.
And that group doesn't want to look at everything either, probably,
Right.
whoever they
Right.
might be down the road, but they
My
want to
guess is
focus on
they're
really
gonna
kind of
wanna really look at.
bigger picture things that have real long-term impact on the environment or on the sustainability of the city, so it is, it's tricky.
And the other thing is, I don't think, in the current process we have, it's not as if these things are gonna happen outside of the public process. There's gonna be, well, Marilyn was on the ordinance committee for city council. I think you have your public hearings, we have our public hearings, OPD has their public hearings. Hopefully, people are gonna have plenty of opportunities to comment on something.
Right, the challenge is probably less about the number of public hearings. I'm actually, one of my concerns about this process is, does it create too many public hearings if people don't do it? But more about the outreach to get people to the public hearings. That's often the biggest challenge, is to get people to do it. Okay, onward?
Wayne, when I brought this up in that joint meeting, it was more like the little decisions, like those diagrams
Right.
that we added to, it wasn't these diagrams.
But it's still, I mean, I didn't know where you were going with it,
Yeah.
but it's still, I don't know where the line is. I'm not trying to push you in one direction or the other. I'm looking for guidance as to
Yeah.
where that line is, and obviously, as a couple of you have said, when this new committee's formed, we'll be looking to them for guidance, and, you know, and,
So you're keeping score of this?
yeah, and what I have is,
We passed?
what I have is the first one you were saying is the old system, so that's the clarity and technical performance. On the traffic mitigation, most but not all of you were saying the old system. Under this one, the parking requirements, most but not all of you are saying the new system, that the sustainable Northampton piece. So we don't have consensus.
I don't know.
I'd say I'd put it
We'd
in
have to take a straw
one.
vote on that.
Okay, so this one's the same.
I'd say, well, I'm not sure, I can't remember how, I forgot.
Okay. So then just start with
I say old.
I say, well,
I say new.
I'd abstain on this. Right on the thing.
Okay.
So it's still old.
Okay, so it's old, but still not consensus, so, okay. All right, and so again, my efforts are trying to make each one a little bit harder. So sustainable Northampton, I'm sorry, the rewrite of the cluster regulations. We had talked about it for years, we actually got as far as a draft 2 years ago, and we deliberately put it on hold during sustainable Northampton. So it's hard for me to say it's not linked together. Certainly part of the issue for me is, on the one hand, I want this discussion, on the other hand, I now know the number of bad projects we've had approved in the last 2 years because we haven't acted on these things, so it makes me personally frustrated. But, so I was assuming this sort of conversation, by the time I got here, you all would say new, but, you know, I wanted to bring it up that way. So, and so the basic premise is saying, right now, developer has to save at least 50% of the site. As a practical matter, because the formula is usually about 60%, and typically the developer figures out where they want to develop the homes, and what's left is the open space, and the developer has lots of rules to follow up where the homes are. The basic premise of this is saying, developer works with the planning board and the Western Standard Conservation Commission up front, figures out what land should we preserve up front. And in return for getting the best land preserved, the developer figured out how he wants to develop that 40% of the property. You know, if they want to do less frontage requirements, you know, as long as it doesn't affect anybody outside of their project, what do we care? The buyers are the ones that have to buy into it. So they could do a Hospital Hill type project that's close to the street, or they could do a more suburban housing project, and that really becomes more their call.
Does this deal with the whole issue of virtual frontage and just
Just say you don't need frontage. You know, we have 2 districts in towns where we don't have frontage requirements. We have
central business?
central business, general business. So this would say you don't need frontage, you need to have access, you need to have a common driveway to get there, somebody to get there. And so, but rather than giving away development rights, we're saying first you sit down with the board and figure out what land has to be preserved.
Well, I guess this kind of, you know, now that we saw a flag lot a few weeks ago, the clusters without the frontage issues seem like they could become, if you could stick one in almost anywhere, and we're talking about, we have issues with flag lots, and maybe that's a separate discussion, we'll talk about how we're gonna handle those.
You need frontage to say how many units.
Right,
Right, so the formula, you need frontage and lot area for how many units you get. So you still need frontage. But once you have that frontage requirement, you don't
the
necessarily
frontage
have
for a
access.
cluster was, it's not like, I mean, you need much less frontage with a cluster.
Right. I'll give you an example of a project that we did. We've done now 6 limited development projects in town. We buy land as part of making, you know, preserving open space. So we did one off Sylvester Road, where we did an assessment of where do we want, we needed to sell 2 building lots to make the numbers work. So we, in this 88-acre parcel of land, we're carving off 2 lots. We did assessment of a beautiful parcel of farmland along the road we wanted to preserve, some rich uplands and wetlands in the back we wanted to preserve, and a standing knoll in the middle was sort of sterile. That was a great place for the 2 units to go there. But we needed frontage. So there are flag lots with a little flagpole that came down to the road. Frankly, I would just not have any frontage requirement. 2 lots exactly where they were, the driveway exactly where it is, but let the farmer own the land that's down there. So we do frontage as a way to control development. but there's another way to control development. That is, you're telling the developer where the homes can go. They don't want you
The difference is the frontage has to be assigned with each lot in that example, whereas for the cluster, the whole area, you have the frontage for the whole area, and then that defines how many units based on the acreage or whatever. And then essentially that frontage disappears, so the buildings can go anywhere they want on the lot or
Right.
under this.
And what you're practically getting now is, you sort of have this on the books now. What you're getting is, a lot of developers, to get to the same point, are doing, or at least talking about clusters that are a condominium project in the master deed. And that's why they're doing it, to get rid of frontage fees. So they have a backdoor approach to this anyway, and get out of frontage, but still not get, still nice junky open space. So they did how we get the good open space, and that's what we should do.
I think this definitely has merit, but the fact that we put on hold during the sustainability process kind of makes
Yep.
it have to go, go through the new.
Okay, that makes sense.
In terms of where we left the city council with when we're gonna start this committee, what was the next step? Was it George, you and Ken were meeting with members of the city council? How
Yeah,
close
it's,
are
it's not unknown in kind of, processes like this, we're trying to work out a date with the one volunteer from the council, Michael Bardsley. There was an idea that another counselor, David, you got his last name, don't tell him that. Yeah, Murphy, David Murphy was gonna join the group, but they're still waiting to get a clarification on yet another counselor who thought he or she wanted to join the group also. So it's getting bogged down a little bit, until that first planning meeting. There's a lot of other people in the city who are weighing in that would like to be on the planning group in order just to move it to the next stage to say, here's a plan for the subcommittee to look like, so it's,
Not soon.
And this is the committee to decide how to form the committee.
Yeah,
I
In
thought
case we
that-
were wondering how fast this is
Exactly.
gonna
We're
happen.
going to carve off an ad hoc committee and we're going to form a
Right.
committee to.
So we can have another meeting together and bring some back.
did I spin that in a positive way?
I guess one thing that we can do to possibly speed the process along once a committee's in place is try and maybe have the language of the zoning defined in some kind of, way of presenting it, so that when it goes to this committee, they're not just grappling with the basic language of going from a concept to actual things that we can propose. I think that was probably one of the plans all along, is that we can propose language, or anyone can propose language that then gets vetted by that commission for compliance with sustainability. So maybe, I don't know how far along the language was when we.
We'll use work. I mean, it's, it's good language for definition.
But I think, if we can have it almost complete to what we feel comfortable with, and then try and get it as a priority in this new group, then at least when they get up and running, then it can maybe.
Are you speaking, Keith, specifically
For
this
this
one?
one, or any of them that, who knows, it might be 3 months, maybe 6 months, maybe
Right.
a year before this committee comes up, so at least we could be doing something that,
Yeah.
there's nothing worse than starting with a blank page.
Yeah.
Especially in the committee, because it can just take forever to formalize it.
Right.
Whereas if you get something black and white, at least you can react to it and provide suggestions. It seems like a better.
I would also think just what we're doing now would be a very helpful exercise for these new members to go through. Here are 6 or 8 or 10 possible zoning changes. Evaluate those and see which ones should stay here in the committee and which ones could go just through the regular old process. And somehow give them the scope of their work and how often they meet and how much work is involved in zoning changes. So we're letting them know up front, don't take a big bite of this apple if you're, only have so much time. But I think they need to do a little bit of this also, because they're gonna wanna be able, they're gonna need to set their, boundaries and parameters a little bit.
Which, I guess I need to go back a step. How is their inquiry, how is that group different than what we do? Is it just another layer of checks and balances, or?
Or just something that was defined in the sustainability plan that would have been set up, such a committee to.
To do what, though?
To review compliance with
I guess to do broader outreach than you can do and to have more time, and this comes back to how much time they spend, but, you know, you had to deal with 54 East Hampton Road before we could start talking about this.
Right, so they're sort of like us, but they don't have to do any of the painful permitting stuff.
But I think part of the decision that hasn't been made in the committee is, what's their, I mean, are they replacing you? I mean, I've sort of seen this as a collaboration working with you, for doing it, and so I think that's part of the process. How does that process work? I don't know.
Right.
You know.
Right, because I mean, I just don't wanna see it as being two committees that are doing exactly the same thing, just with different
I think
members.
one of the things, how it came out was that we started going, what the heck, our names next to an awful lot of this stuff. And at that time, we were up till 1 o'clock in the morning dealing with zoning.
Right.
So this was like one of the ways to try and
Dealing
keep,
with
you know, cause the 6 or 7 years I've been on the board, you know, a night like this is a rare event.
Right.
And, you know, so I think that's part of where it came out, was it was gonna have a concentrated people, whether it has planning board members on it or not.
I think it was really for larger planning issues and like a total revamp of the zoning, similar to what happened in, whatever it was, 74. So I think that's what they don't need to deal with this.
Right, and that's, I guess, where my line is. Part of the reason that more of these are uncomfortable using the old process is, I think, big things like form-based code, clearly you guys can't do it. It requires an enormous community consensus that's out there. And so I'd almost rather think about sort of the next big idea and not messing with these small things. Somewhere they're gonna get bogged down, but.
Yeah,
you know.
no, I hear you. If they ever get one.
Well, and I think also zoning is a very technical kind of body of work that I'm really not comfortable with often, and we lean on the planning office to propose it and tweak it and make it legalese to make sure it fits in all the charts and everything. So it's a way to give them some more help and not to lay it all on us.
But do you think a
You know.
new committee is going to have any expertise on it?
Well, that's the idea. There are,
Those are the people who need to be on it.
those are the people who are already kind of stepping up and
Know
saying,
this
you know, they'd like to be on it.
Are they?
There's probably not a lot of,
Zoners?
zoners. You know, and I also
many
think
are-
some of it is a reaction to the hotel project and the Smith College. There's a lot of people in the city who think we don't represent the neighbors and different communities and different interests. That we're part of the back
There's a large
room.
number of people that don't understand the Dover and
Well, but it's a way to get more public process into the zoning thing, as if there isn't enough already, but people are overly concerned that too much of this stuff is done behind closed doors. So, and even though the best practices committee is looking at that, I think this is another way too for some people to ensure that.
But I think they're, in some ways, are gonna be somewhat hamstrung by not having to sit through the permitting process that we do every 2 weeks, because we understand the realities of how these things play out, and they don't
Yep.
see that.
Well, that's
Well,
why I don't
Peter?
see, they're not gonna replace, I think it's
Right.
another step in the process, but I would never look at them as being a replacement for what we did.
No.
Plus, we're still in the process.
Are you
It's gonna come to
extending
that
the
committee and
process?
it's gonna come to us
Right.
for a public hearing.
But it will be interesting to see if we start to butt heads in that way, where they come to us with something that's completely unworkable for any number of reasons, because we've seen how it works in reality.
But that's what I'm saying is.
The people who are gonna be on that committee, I think, need to be people who really know something about planning and zoning, and there are a lot of people in Northampton who are really professional at that.
Right, but I think that a lot of people are gonna disagree with that, because a lot of people are gonna wanna be on the committee who don't come to the table with those skills.
Right, well, that's part of what we're trying to.
Right, I think that's going to be a lot of the controversy setting up. Is it
Right.
a committee of experts, or is it
Right.
a broad,
Is
you
it
know?
people who
Right.
just come from this neighborhood or that neighborhood versus people who actually know something about
It's gonna be the
Right.
same
Yeah, but-
fight that we have.
So this will be criticized for not being broad enough.
some of the so-called experts have own very narrow points of interest that they want to expound.
Extraordinarily narrow.
Pardon?
Extraordinarily narrow.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so next example, flag lot. You know, you've had one you talked about recently, you know, should there be changing a flag lot? You went from no limit to length of flagpole to creating a 300-foot limit. Is going to 200-foot limit a small housekeeping thing, or is it really about changing the vision for what flag lots are? And likewise is doing some equivalent to what you, again, don't worry the numbers, but more generally as examples of which ones those fit.
Or do we want flag poles covered?
Do a flagpole.
Right, and that question makes me think, like, if this is what the proposal is, but maybe the group wants to consider a much broader change to have no flag lot.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Can we shift the responsibility of deciding whether these are sustainability review group or whether it's just general housekeeping to city council? But don't we introduce zoning to city council who then refer it back to us for their public hearing process? So
have them refer to a committee as needed.
So have them make the decision, whether, let them sit for hours at night deciding whether flag lots raises to the level that they've, cause we get criticized a lot of time when certain councillors come and say, you know, the public process, blah, 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 so why not put the onus on the, cause they're eventually the ones who are gonna vote on the
So
zoning.
you could do this, you could take those changes through the first 3 steps, and then as city council, you know, maybe you do it in the cover memo, you make a recommendation, maybe it doesn't, maybe the recommendation says, planning board thinks, you know, there should be this process, with planning board split, but you still do the first 3 steps.
And then they make the final decision, is that what you're saying?
No,
They decide who goes.
They decide who to refer it.
Right, that's what I mean, the decision is, yeah.
That's, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's very appealing on one hand. The only problem I have with it is, once a zoning change is introduced, you can make amendments to it, but you can't just sort of rethink its whole basic premises. And so it's easier to catch that stuff up front. I mean, you know, when this committee's formed, I'm certainly hoping that the discussions between the planning board and this committee happen before things are introduced, not once it's introduced. So I guess that's the only issue.
If we think of this group as an advisory board, an advisory committee to the planning board and to the planning office, maybe they'll have the expertise and the time, for instance, if we use that one of the flag lots, to see what else is being done in other communities, what are other examples, what are some, not that Wayne and Carolyn don't do that at times, but it serves as a resource then for them. And if Catherine and I hope that there are other people out there who are interested in this, who want to do this, then they will basically come back to us in that process with these draft ideas of this is a way to approach flag lots that's sustainable and innovative. And then we're not doing that big planning work, we're not looking on the web at all these sites, we're not going to these meetings.
But that's fine, I'm just trying to resolve the issue of whether we should take on something. I'm just trying to pass the buck.
I know it, and I don't think we want to pass it
Essentially,
over there.
the city council is who votes on any zoning change, so, you know, if they're not happy with the process, then they're not gonna vote it, so why not let them, I don't know if there's a way to introduce something that's an idea and then have them, you know, that's not the specific zoning language, but just, you know, send it, I don't know how you would do that.
Well, certainly the easiest thing, you know, is 4 city councils in Edinburgh. We can have the same discussion with Edinburgh as well. I mean, again, it's a minority of the council, but at least it's, you know, councils are.
Oh,
Yeah, I guess the worry about sending something like an open-ended concept to the city council, to expect them to kind of clarify it for us and send it back to us, kind of does sound a little scary.
Wouldn't we be making a recommendation to them?
I'd rather
Send it to
recommend the most specific thing possible to them. And if they choose to refer it to Ed Lou and then the normal process, or they decide at that point to refer it to the sustainability committee, that's fine, but I'd rather not give them a concept, I'd rather give them.
So the way to do it maybe is the ones which you all have said either unanimously or by consensus, but not, or by majority, that should follow the old method. You'd introduce the old way, and we say in the cover letter, but you know, if councils are uncomfortable with this, you always have the option to refer to the new committee. So
Right.
you'd be making a recommendation, but clearly reminding them of an alternative route if they wanted to.
And I think the idea of having that letter go to Ed Lou, which is a smaller, more informal, they get things done a little bit quicker than the whole city council to debate it, might be a better vehicle, and let them screen that.
And they're meeting next week. I can at least, you know, have a brief
Yeah.
discussion with them next week. Sort of.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, as much as I think, you know, having yet more committees to look at these things is good for the public process, but we're never gonna get things done.
Yeah.
At this, I mean, it's gonna take so long to get something through this process that, I mean, I'm a little hesitant to give anything other than something that's very clear. And, you know, that's my concern. I mean, the flag lot, if we just say, what do you think of flag lots, and give it to them, I just don't think it'll go anywhere.